Hello and welcome back to the next video for CSC314 assembly language. The getting started video. This video is going to cover creating your Linux virtual machine, which we'll be using to do all the projects, labs in the class. It's pretty straightforward to do. I don't think this video is going to be too terribly long, but you need to just go step by step. I'm sure some of you have maybe even created your own virtual machines. Maybe you've even done it by using the VirtualBox software. Some of you are already familiar with Linux, but a lot of you are not or minimally familiar with either of these things. So this is going to go pretty step by step, just to make sure we're all on the same page. So what I want you to do, and you're going to need to pause the video occasionally here probably, but you can follow these links that are in the notes right now and download some software. What I will say is this video is basically going to cover this section in the notes up to here. We're just going to get your virtual machine created and get a Linux operating system installed on that virtual machine. Then the next video, we're going to be setting up your Linux environment, maybe learning your way around the Linux environment a little bit as well, and make sure you're set up to be able to do what needs to be done. And then the final video for this first week will be creating and running your first assembly language program. Do remember that when you're watching my videos, you should get some screenshots showing your progress, that you're following along with what I'm doing. For these early videos, probably each video, I mean, if you get 2 or 3 screenshots at intermediate stages, just kind of show. And if you forget to get a screenshot, you can always kind of go back and sort of redo. But just, you want to just kind of grab screenshots to show that you are actually doing the work, getting things following along and so forth, so that you can submit that to the classwork Dropbox and get your classwork class participation credit for the class. So now what you need to do is follow, first of all, the VirtualBox link here, and you're going to download VirtualBox 5.2.4. VirtualBox is free software for creating and managing virtual machines. You probably already know what a virtual machine is, but if you don't, a virtual machine is basically a simulation of a computer on another computer. So you have a software simulation of a computer, but that software simulation is running on another computer. That other computer could itself be a virtual machine. You could have a virtual machine within a virtual machine within a virtual machine if you wanted to. We're not planning on going that deep. Presumably you have a desktop or laptop in front of you, and you are going to be installing this VirtualBox software on that, and then you will use VirtualBox to create a virtual machine, which is what we'll actually use to do the projects in this class. So most of you are probably using Windows, so you're going to want to click Windows Host, as I'm about to do here, and that should start the download, and you should be good to go. If you are on a Mac OS machine, then of course you want to click Mac OS, and I'm going to step through the installation for Windows, but at least for VirtualBox, the step-by-step is pretty straightforward, and so regardless of which system you're on, you should be fine. If you are somebody who's already got some advanced Linux knowledge and you have your own Linux machine and that's what you're doing your work on, it's still not a bad idea to become familiar with VirtualBox if you're not already. So you might as well install VirtualBox on your Linux machine and then create another Linux virtual machine within your Linux machine. So that's okay too, but I'm not going to step through any step-by-step instructions there. If you're already kind of an advanced or even an intermediate Linux user, Linux administrator, I'm sure you can sort out for yourself how to do that installation. So back to the Windows. So you download that software, and that's, as you see, mine's already done here. That one's probably not going to take that long. So come back to the notes, and the other one we want to do is Linux Mint, the Linux Mint distribution. This is basically an image of an installation disk for the Linux Mint operating system, which is of course a variant, a particular Linux variant, and it's specifically a variant of Ubuntu. There are pros and cons to all Linux variations. This is just one that I happen to like. I don't claim that it's the best for all possible worlds. As a variation of Ubuntu, it's particularly easy to install and use, and as a first step into the Linux world, it's certainly, I think, a good option. Those of you who have experience with Linux, you may prefer to use other Linux versions. However, for this class, I would prefer that you use exactly the same environment that I'm using. That way, if there's any questions come up, whatever, we don't end up running into mix-ups just because you're on a slightly different version of Linux or something. So stick with Linux Mint 18.3, the Cinnamon variant of that, and the 64-bit version of that. That is what we want here. So if you came into the download page for Linux Mint here, you want the Cinnamon 64-bit version, and we should be on version 18.3 here. If you were looking at my old video from last year, of course I think it was 18.1 that we installed back then. And I think back then I also had the students install the 32-bit version. That's simply because we're going to be doing 32-bit assembly, but actually, for most purposes, I think it's just better to stick with the 64-bit versions of things now. And it's easy enough to compile assembly code, 32-bit assembly code, even on a 64-bit machine. We have a couple little additional configuration steps to go through, but it's not that big of a deal. So go ahead and stick with the 64-bit Linux Mint 18.3. So once you're on this download page, come down, you just check a mirror site. I suppose if you have a torrent client, you could use the torrent link instead, but should only take something on like 10-20 minutes. It depends on your the speed of your internet connection, and so at any rate, just pick a link, mirror link, and let it run. Looks like mine's gonna be in the 10-15 minute ballpark here. I'm of course not gonna wait for that to download because I already have it download. You may want to pause and come back after both of your things are fully downloaded. So go pause and then come back, and now I'll say welcome back if you pause. All right, so here we are. You've got these downloaded, so now we need to do the installation. So you need to find where you downloaded them to. Hopefully you're all experienced enough computer users that does not pose you any trouble. It's probably going to be in a downloads folder on your machine, unless you've changed the default location that your browser downloads things to. Make sure you do save these things as files. Don't download and just automatically open them. Okay, so VirtualBox, that's the first thing we want to do is install VirtualBox. So let's run the installer there. This is very straightforward. All the defaults should be fine. Default location. You may or may not want the shortcuts, but that's kind of neither here nor there. And yes, and ready to go, and install, and off it goes. Give it permission and let it run. Alright, so once it's finished installing, you can go ahead and start it up. And popped over on a different screen here. Let me bring it to this screen. And am I sure that I'm recording? Let me double check that. Yes, I am recording. Okay, good. This is the VirtualBox Manager window. And VirtualBox is software for creating and managing your virtual machines. It is not the virtual machine itself. It manages the virtual machines. Once you have that open, you may want to pin that to the taskbar, although for some reason it doesn't get the right icon down here, so I'm going to close it, bring up the start menu, type in VIR to search it up, and let's run it again. And it's still not giving me the right icon. Okay, if I pin it, okay, it has the right icon. There, we're good. I think I just clicked it an extra time, so I might have a copy of this pop up that I'm going to have to exit out of. But Well, doesn't seem to be doing it now, so maybe I got away without that happening. All right, now, so with Virtual Box Manager up, then the next thing we need to do is create your virtual machine. So in VirtualBox Manager, you're going to click New here, and you're going to give your machine a name. It should be something that includes your name and includes like CSC314. So something like, for me, for example, Scott Graham CSC314. I prefer to use camel caps there. I'm not picky about the format here, but I do want you to have your name and CSC314 in there. And when you do screenshots and so forth, that's something I'll be able to see, so I do want you to do that. And Linux and other Linux 64-bit are what we want for the type and version. I have all these settings in the notes, by the way, so if you come back to the notes and need to remember what they are, there it is. And then memory size, I would suggest about 2 gigabytes. You could get away with quite a bit less if you felt like if for some reason your desktop or laptop that you're doing this on does not have a lot of memory of its own, then you don't want to give too much of that to a virtual machine. I think I have, well, on my desktop I have tons. My laptop, I also use 2 gigabyte for the virtual machines. I think it has 8, maybe 16 gig total. But 2 gig, I think, just tends to be a sweet spot. You probably do just fine with 1 gig if you wanted to, so take your pick. At any rate, you do want to create a virtual hard disk, so let's click Create here, and it's going to default to use your machine name as the file location for where that hard disk goes. That'll be fine. You want a VDI. The only thing you want to change here is the size. I would go with about 32 gig, and notice here that it's dynamically allocated. What that basically means is the real file on your real hard drive will not be 32 gigabytes immediately. It's not going to reserve all that space up front. Dynamically allocated means it's only going to use as much as it actually needs to represent the contents of your virtual hard drive, and initially that's not going to be all that much. So you're probably never going to hit this 32 gigabyte limit, so that's actually probably overkill, but you might as well set a reasonable limit for your virtual machine, and 32 is about right. So let's go ahead and click Create there, and we should be good to go. And now you'll notice that I have another virtual machine listed here in my virtual machine manager, and it's powered off currently. It has not yet started. Now before this thing starts up, go to Settings. There's just a few things I want you to do. It won't kill it if you didn't do this before you hit start the first time, but let's set shared clipboard to bidirectional. You could set drag and drop to bidirectional as well, but I've found that tends to be buggy with VirtualBox virtual machines. Maybe they've fixed those bugs recently, but I don't care to mess with it. I don't really find it all that useful, so it should be just fine. So now for system processor, make sure this enable PAENX is selected, checked. I have found in the past sometimes that's not checked by default, and I haven't seen a rhyme or reason why it isn't always checked, but if it's unchecked, you want to check it. And finally, for display here, click the Enable 3D Acceleration box here. It's not a horrible problem if this is disabled and you're not able to check it, or if you forget to check it, but it might as well be checked if you've got it. We're not even actually going to do 3D. It just an annoying message pops up if you don't have this set, so this will help us get rid of that. Alright, so let's click OK there, and now we're ready to start for the first time. Now don't jump ahead too quickly, just make sure you follow step by step what I do. So before you do anything here, you want to find your Linux distro, and basically what we're effectively doing is virtually inserting a virtual installation disk for the operating system into a virtual optical drive. So let's find that. Now on my system I have this over here, So let's go ahead and grab that. There it is. Now you're ready to hit start. If you forgot this and hit start and then you try and restart it to do this again, it won't even give you this option. Just go ahead and create your virtual machine all over again. I could show you a way to kind of insert this without doing that, but let's just I don't want to get too off track. So if for some reason you forgot this step, just start over, create another new virtual machine, and remember this step the next time. Nice thing about virtual machines, you can create pretty much as many as you want. They're really just data files on your computer, so you can't hurt anything. If you mess a virtual machine up, you can just create a new one and so forth. So at any rate, click start here and fire it up. Now basically this is, as far as the virtual machine is concerned, it's a real machine. It doesn't know it's a virtual machine, and it's booting up for the very first time. And it saw that there was nothing to boot from on its virtual hard disk, so it looked at its virtual optical drive and saw a disk there and is booting from that, and that's going to be the install disk for Linux Mint. And so that's booting up for you right now. And this is going to take a little while, and it's probably going to take a little while for you, so I'm just going to sit here and let it go. You might skip ahead in the video to where it has booted up. And I'm just hanging out here waiting for it to boot up. There it is, there it is. Okay, it went a little faster than I thought it would. And there's that message that hardware acceleration, 3D acceleration, is going to get rid of for us. There's another step before this actually is gotten rid of, but for now you can just click that and get rid of it. So notice that you have booted up into Linux, but this is Linux booted from the virtual optical disk drive. Okay, it's not Linux booted up from the virtual hard disk drive. So it's not really installed on your virtual computer yet. To install it, we're going to double click the install Linux Mint icon here, and that will run the actual installer. If any of you have installed an operating system before, maybe you've installed Windows on a real machine before, it's basically the same idea. You've booted up the machine. It doesn't have anything on the hard drive to start with. You boot it up, it boots from the CD-ROM or the DVD, and then you run the installer from there. So now you're going to choose a language and continue, and you don't really need to install this third-party stuff. It just lets your virtual machine play movies and things like that. Again, because Ubuntu and Mint are intended kind of more for a mainstream average computer user, they try to make everything as easy as possible. Most computer users want to be able to play movies and so forth, so installing this is not a bad idea. For your virtual machine for this class, it's not particularly useful. So we continue, and now we're ready to install. Of course, it's going to say we're erasing and installing Linux Mint. Now it's talking about erasing your virtual hard drive, not your real hard drive, so this is not anything that's going to hurt anything. So we're ready to click install now. And continue, and that should fire up the installation problem. Now it's going to ask us a few more questions after it does some preparation steps. Once the time zone, if you are here at DSU or anywhere nearby, you're in the Chicago's time zone. Otherwise, select whichever your time zone is and click continue. And now once the keyboard format, and you select the one you want and click continue. And now for your identity, go ahead and put your name in here. And for the computer name here, as far as Linux, we've kind of defined the computer name as far as the virtual physical machine that is being simulated by the VirtualBox Manager. We've already given that a name, but the Linux operating system now wants a name. Here, again, your name and CS314 should be good. Maybe just your first name now, or maybe your last name, whichever you prefer. And then pick a username for yourself, or you can just go with its default. If you put your name here, it's going to default to your first name. and then a password. Now, security is not an issue for your virtual machine because it only exists within your real machine. So just pick something easy to remember. I'm not sure if it'll let you get away with a blank password, but you can try that if you want. You can tell it to log you in automatically on boot up. For some reason, I never do that. It's just a habit I have, but you could just have it log you in automatically. And now it's doing the actual install. And right now I've been doing this in a small window. You can maximize this and have a much bigger window to work with your virtual machine. And so this is going to retrieve and install a bunch of data files on the virtual hard disk. Again, I'm just going to go ahead and wait for this to finish so that you see the whole process. This usually takes, I think, about 5 minutes, so you may want to skip ahead a little bit. Just make sure you don't skip too far and miss a step, because there's a few other things we need to do here. Actually, while this is going, I'm going to go grab a soda. Actually, I said skip ahead, but that actually doesn't make much sense because you're going to have to be sitting and waiting for your computer. Your computer might even be slower than mine as far as finishing this process. So you might as well just hang out here with me in the video while you are letting this install run. And just judging from the time, it looks like this is going to maybe come in at about 30 minutes for this video. 30 minutes total, not 30 minutes just to do that install. So once we install, we're going to then install some things called guest editions in your Linux operating systems, reboot, and we'll basically be done with what we're doing here. And then I'll jump right into creating the next video, which is about setting up your Linux environment once you've got it. Alright, my installation has completed. That was a little bit faster than I expected. And so now it's ready for your machine to reboot. So click restart now. And I think it's going to want you to press return to continue here. It says remove installation medium. Of course, it's virtual. They're talking about the virtual disk that was the install disk for Linux here. There's nothing physically to remove. Just press enter here and let it go. And now your virtual machine is going to be rebooting. And this time it's going to look at its virtual hard disk to get the operating system and boot up from that. And now it's going to give you a login. So hopefully you chose a password that you can remember. Otherwise, the easiest thing would be to start over and just create a new virtual machine. There are probably ways we could bypass this, but at any rate, we're not going to bother with that. Hopefully, like I said, hopefully you chose a password you can remember. All right, so now it boots up. We still have this message about software rendering mode, and the guest editions are going to clear that up. We have a welcome screen here. I do encourage you to check things out, learn about Linux on your own. We're not going to spend a huge amount of course time on learning about Linux. I'm going to get you into some basics and some understanding of what's going on. But I encourage you to start experimenting and learning more, and turn yourself into at least a beginning Linux administrator. It's absolutely a good skill to have. So just start familiarizing yourself both what's here and just use Google Linux Mint and start learning about Linux Mint and so forth. Um, Learn some of the history of Linux and so forth. But for now, I'm gonna take away that welcome screen, and the next thing we need to do is add what are called guest additions to your virtual machine. So I want to kind of orient you and make sure you understand what's going on. So remember, VirtualBox Manager, Oracle VirtualBox. This is the software that manages your virtual machines. These over here are 3 virtual machines that I've created. And then this window over here contains your virtual machine, but the entire window is still being run by VirtualBox Manager. Okay, and in fact, these menus across the top, these are menus for VirtualBox Manager for manipulating the virtual machine that's in this window. All right, so these are ways in which you use VirtualBox Manager to interact with that machine. These menus are not part of Linux. They are not part of your virtual machine. They are part of the management of your virtual machine. Your virtual machine is everything inside the frame of the window. Down here at the bottom, again, these status icons are being provided by the VirtualBox Manager. They are not part of the machine itself. So it's everything, basically everything that's dark in here. That's your Linux Mint operating system, and that's your actual virtual machine that you're interacting with there. So what if you wanted to install some other software into this from a disk? In particular, these things called guest additions. Well, that's something VirtualBox Manager, the manager of the virtual machine, can do for you from this devices menu. We can insert the guest addition CD image. So you do that, and it's as if on a physical machine you actually had a disk and put it into the disk drive. A lot of disk drives, optical disk drives, are even becoming obsolete nowadays, so many of you may not even have an optical disk drive of any kind on your physical machine. But your virtual machine does still have an optical disk drive, and you can put virtual optical disks into it. That's what we did with the original Linux install optical disk, virtual optical disk, and now we're doing that with the guest additions optical disk. And it auto runs, pops up this option here to run. We do want to run it, so click run. And this is doing an installation, so once your administrative password, you are the administrator of your own machine, so it's whatever password you came up with for yourself. So put that in and let that run. This should only take half a minute or so. So we sit here and wait for that time to pass. And once that time has passed, it's ready for you to press return to close that window, assuming, should read these messages, make sure it looks like everything went through. I've never had a problem with it. Actually, I haven't really ever paid too closely attention. It's saying that something here failed. I don't think that's actually an issue. I have not had an issue with this yet, so I would not worry about it too much. And from here, press return, closes that window. So now the guest additions are installed, and we are ready to restart once again. And once it's restarted, we are basically done with what I want to accomplish in this video. Go ahead and log back in. And now I'm going to maximize it. So in here, let's orient ourselves a little bit. So once again, it's going to give you this welcome screen. It still thinks that its virtual disk of the guest editions is in its virtual disk drive. So let's go ahead and eject that so it's not hanging around anymore. And so this is Linux, or this is Linux Mint in particular. It has a desktop GUI very similar to what you're familiar with Windows or Macintosh, but it has its own quirks and peculiarities. So let's go ahead and orient ourselves just a little bit. So down here we have a taskbar, and it's got 4 things on here currently. We are actually, well, the show desktop would just wipe anything off that was actually on there. So you have a Firefox web browser, which should be able, with everything configured by default, should already be able to access the internet through your host machine. You've got a terminal program. This is what we're going to be spending a lot of time working with. So if you've done any kind of work with any version of Linux or Unix before, you would have been working with some kind of terminal interface, and so this should be familiar to you. And then you also have a file explorer. It has a different look than Windows File Explorer, but it's the same basic idea. And you can delve down into folders, which are mostly empty right now. But this just gives you another way of looking at what is on your computer. Now, when you start up a terminal, by default, it's going to start you up in your home folder. Your home folder is the shortcut name of your home folder is the tilde sign. And if you've done anything in Linux before, then you probably already know commands like ls. ls is basically the list command for listing the contents of the current folder. The prompt over here, everything from here over is called a prompt. The prompt is basically giving you your username at your computer name, and then what your current folder is on that computer, and then the $sign is just kind of the indicator. Your command starts here. So there's the cd command for change directory. So for instance, you can cd downloads, and notice that the path here showing you your current folder is your home folder / downloads, indicating that your current folder now is the downloads folder within the home folder. There's nothing in here. If you do an ls command, nothing. And if you're more familiar with, kind of the file explorer way of looking at things, we are here. So this is your downloads folder within your home folder. Now your home folder is not the top of the hierarchy. In fact, if I hit this arrow to the left here, you can say that I'm in the folder Scott, my username, under the folder home, which is where all the home folders of all the users would normally be. And then that is under the kind of the root or top folder of your entire file system. So this is where we are right now in the File Explorer, and in your terminal, that's where we are right now in the downloads folder of your home folder. If I do cd ... basically just means go up one folder, or it means the parent folder or the containing folder of the folder you are currently in. So you could do cd ... and that takes you back to your home folder. So notice it's just the tilde here now. And if I cd, let's go into a different one just for grins. Now I'm in the pictures folder, which also contains nothing. And another way to go to my home folder would be cd tilde. And that also takes me back to my home folder. And I don't know if I go down into public, also contains nothing. And if I wanted to go back to my home folder, another way I could do that would be cd / home / Scott. All of those are, well, this and this are the same thing. The cd ... does not mean go home, it means go up one level. So if we were down 2 levels or something, that would not take us to the home folder. So I'm not going to make this a long video looking at all the Linux commands. I definitely recommend taking your own time to Google basic Linux bash commands, kind of go through a tutorial. I will be showing you more of that stuff in future videos. In fact, the next video I'll probably do a little bit more of this, but I do want you to just kind of get comfortable, get oriented within Linux. Another thing, the last thing I'm going to point out here is the menu icon down here on the bottom left of the taskbar. And this is a lot like the Windows Start menu. In fact, on my Windows machine, you can see my Windows Start menu right here. So if I want to interact with my actual Windows machine, there it is. And then all this taskbar, this is just all my regular Windows taskbar down here. Everything above that, because I've got the virtual machine window full screen or maximized, this is all VirtualBox. And again, remember, these menus up here are not part of the virtual machine. They're part of the manager of the virtual machine. This bar at the bottom, the white bar at the bottom, these icons, those are provided by the manager of the virtual machine to show various statuses. But everything in between, that is the virtual machine. So the last thing I'm going to show you here is you have the start menu, and just as with Windows, you have the power options, restart, reset, and so forth. Yeah, it's basically the same thing here within your virtual machine. So I can click this to power off or reboot my virtual machine. So just to kind of show you a few more things, if you wanted to completely shut down your virtual machine, then of course you could choose shut down here. So I'm going to do that now. And notice that back here in my VirtualBox Manager software, I have my virtual machine. Now it says powered off. Notice that my other virtual machines here say saved, which is the next thing I'm going to show you. When we start a powered off virtual machine, it actually now has to go through the full boot up process that a real machine would have to go through. Most of the time, you don't want to have to deal with that. And so I'm going to show you how to basically freeze your virtual machine in time. So it's booted up. Now I have to log in again. I log in. And I'm not sure why my GeForce experience wants to interact with my VirtualBox, but apparently it does. Any gamers out there? I'm addicted to Overwatch myself. Okay, so it comes back. It brings back the welcome screen. It doesn't have the windows that I had open before because this was basically a full shutdown and reboot, just as if you fully powered off your laptop and rebooted it. It's not like hibernating. But if you want something like hibernating, what you would actually want to do is come up here and you can click close, or from the file menu you can choose close, and then it's going to give you, and again, now you're interacting with the virtual machine manager. This little pop-up here, this is not your virtual machine. This is not your Linux operating system giving you this. This is VirtualBox giving you this option. And here I have the option to save the machine state. Essentially, it's going to save everything that reflects exactly what this machine is doing at this moment, freeze it, save it as a file on disk so it can be reloaded later, and start from exactly where it left off. So that's save the machine state. This is what you want to do most of the time when you're not working with your virtual machine. Only occasionally, if you run into problems with your virtual machine or need to reboot after a software installation or something along those lines, then you might want to do a restart or a power off. If something happens that completely screws up your virtual machine and it's hanging, crashing, something, then you might want to force it to power off and then reboot it. But normally you just want to save the machine state, click OK. And I do want you to, you should be doing these things as you're watching a video. So if you were just watching, don't just watch. Pause, go back, replay that, do those things with your virtual machine. Get screenshots, show me that you've done them. And now notice that it says my virtual machine is saved. That means it's actually in a running state And when I start it again, it's just going to pick up where it left off, which will actually also allow it to start up a lot faster. So now notice it says it's restoring. And now notice, once again, it wants to mess around with my GeForce experience. I don't know why. But we've restored the virtual machine. Notice that the welcome screen has not popped up this time. That's because I'd already closed it before, and it's just picking up from where it left off. So, and if you had, it would have been a better example if I'd had some terminal windows with some commands in here. Because if I had had this when I saved the state and then I came back, this would still be here. So that's the last thing I want to show you, just to kind of give you a quick orientation on your virtual machine in Linux. And then the next video, we are going to install all the Linux packages that we need to do assembly language software development that we're going to be doing for this class. So watch for that video to be coming soon if it's not up already. And yeah, until then.